The boarding house door slammed shut on Christmas Eve, the sound cracking like ice in the bitter air. The boys flinched. Their mother, did not. She had learned long ago that flinching was a luxury she could not afford. Mrs. Pritchard stood in the doorway, a fortress of starched linen and cold judgment. Her face was as hard as the Wyoming winter descending around them. "I don't rent to your kind," she said, the words sharp and final. "Bad for my reputation." Mai pulled her youngest son closer. And was 5, his small body trembling despite the threadbare blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Bo stood beside her, 8 years old and trying to be brave for his mother, his eyes wide in the gloom. Jun, the eldest at 11, had already turned away. He climbed back onto the wagon, his jaw set, his gaze burning with the quiet fury of a boy who understood too much, too soon. "Please," Mai said, her voice a near whisper against the rising wind. "Just for the night. The storm is coming." "Should have thought of that before you came here," Mrs. Pritchard snapped, stepping back. The door shut with a heavy thud, and the lock clicked into place, a sound of absolute finality. Mai stood on the porch, snow beginning to fall in heavy, wet flakes that melted on her dark hair. She could feel the town of Stone Creek watching. Every window on Main Street held a face, their features made indistinct by the warm lamplight that made them glow like the eyes of a judging council. No one moved. No one spoke. Across the street, Mr. Thorne stood in the window of his bank, arms crossed, his mouth curled in a smirk of detached amusement. It was the look of a man who enjoyed watching others break. "Ma," Bo whispered, his small hand finding hers. "What do we do now?" Mai turned from the hostile door. Their wagon sat at the hitching post, a monument to their poverty. Everything they owned was packed into 2 battered trunks. A single horse, its ribs starkly visible, hung its head in exhaustion. 3 sons, no money, and no friendly face for 200 miles. The trail leading out of town vanished into the dark, snow-swept hills. If they stayed, they would freeze in the wagon. If they left, they might freeze in the wilderness. "We'll camp past the ridge," she said, her voice steadier than she felt as she climbed onto the driver's seat. And whimpered softly. Jun said nothing, his silence a heavier burden than any cry. The wagon creaked forward, its wheels groaning in the deepening snow. As they reached the edge of town, Mai glanced back one last time. Every light in Stone Creek burned warm and bright, a constellation of welcome that was not for them. Every door remained closed. She turned her face to the darkness ahead. They were a mile out of town when she saw him, a rider on the ridge above, a silhouette cut sharp against the dying light. He was watching them. Her hand instinctively moved toward the old rifle tucked beneath the seat. As the rider began his descent toward them, she held her breath. He didn't ask her name or her story. He simply reined in his horse beside their struggling wagon and said, "Follow me." Mai's hand tightened on the rifle stock. "I don't know you." "No," his voice was low and steady, not friendly, but not cruel either. "But I know that trail you're on leads nowhere. And I know this storm will kill you and them boys by midnight." "We'll manage," she insisted, pride a thin shield against the cold. "You won't." Anne's teeth were chattering so hard she could feel the vibrations through her coat. Bo had fallen into a chilled silence an hour ago. Even Jun, as stubborn as his late father, had surrendered to the cold, his hat pulled low over his face. The rider waited, patient as the falling snow gathered on his hat brim. "Why?" Mai finally asked, the single word encompassing all her fear and suspicion. He turned his horse without another glance at her. "Follow or don't. Your choice." She followed. The cabin appeared out of the swirling snow after 20 minutes, small and weathered, but solid. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, a promise of warmth. A barn stood behind it, and beyond that, a single grave marker with a simple wooden cross. The rider dismounted and pushed open the cabin door. Golden firelight spilled out onto the snow. "Inside," he said. "All of you." The boy stumbled toward the heat like moths to a flame. Mai hesitated on the threshold, her mistrust warring with a desperate need for shelter. The man ignored her, pulling a heavy canvas sheet from a peg and stringing it across the middle of the small room with practiced efficiency. "Boys by the fire," he directed. "You take the bed. I'll sleep in the barn." "I won't take your charity," she said, her voice stiff. He glanced at her then, his eyes shadowed beneath his hat. "Then call it a trade. You cook. I'll tend your horse." He walked out before she could answer. Through the frosted window, Mai watched him lead her exhausted mare toward the barn, speaking to the animal in low, soothing tones. Then he stopped at the grave marker, his hat in his hand, letting the snow gather on his broad shoulders. He stood there for a long time, a man who seemed to have forgotten how to come in from the cold. And was already asleep, curled against his brother by the hearth. Jun stood rigid, watching the door with suspicion. "Who is he, Ma?" Bo asked. Mai hung her wet coat by the door. "I don't know, my son." She looked at the grave again. 2 names were carved into the wood, Martha and Samuel Hayes. 1879, 3 years dead. She ladled stew from a pot on the hearth into bowls, her hands shaking not just from the cold, but from the enormity of a stranger's kindness on a night when the world had shown them none. The widow did not sit still. Arthur Hayes had noticed that first. In the days after the Christmas storm, as the world lay buried in white, Mai was a constant, quiet motion. She mended his worn shirts, cooked meals that banished the ghosts of his solitary cooking, and taught her sons their letters by the firelight, her voice a soft murmur in the quiet cabin. She insisted on earning their keep, and the small home, which had been a shell of grief, slowly began to feel alive again. The boys worked, too. Jun, serious and watchful, hauled water from the frozen creek. Bo, cheerful despite everything, chopped kindling with a fierce determination. Little and shadowed Arthur everywhere, a silent ghost with enormous, curious eyes. Arthur wasn't used to being watched. He sat on the porch step, carving a small wooden horse, his hands unsteady. Daniel had been 5 when the fever took him. Same ages and same hungry eyes. The memory was a physical pain, sharp and sudden. The knife slipped, and blood welled on his thumb. "Mr. Hayes." He looked up. Mai stood in the doorway, a dusting of flour on her hands. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." She came out anyway, tore a clean strip from her apron, and wrapped his thumb with an efficient gentleness. Her hands were rough, calloused from work, but her touch was soft. "Thank you," he said gruffly. "For what?" "All of it," he said, gesturing vaguely at the organized cabin, the smell of baking bread, the sound of his own mended shirt drying by the fire. She sat beside him on the cold step. "You didn't have to help us." "Yes," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I did." Before she could respond, hoofbeats echoed on the trail. Arthur stood instinctively, his hand moving toward the rifle propped by the door. It was Deputy Walsh, red-faced and uncomfortable, holding a folded paper. "Hayes," the deputy said, dismounting. "Reverend Mills and Mr. Thorne asked me to give you this. Folks are concerned." Arthur unfolded the note from the town council. "Mr. Hayes, a woman of her sort staying unchaperoned in your home presents an improper situation. For the sake of decency, we advise she be encouraged to move along. Town resources can assist." Mai had gone pale, reading it over his shoulder. "Tell them," Arthur said slowly, his voice low and dangerous, "that she's staying until the spring thaw." Walsh shifted his weight. "Arthur, they are serious. Thorne has influence." "Tell them," Arthur repeated, crumpling the note in his fist. After the deputy left, Mai's voice was barely a whisper. "I will not let them ruin you for helping us." He finally looked at the grave, his gaze distant. "They already ruined me, 3 years back. This might be the first thing I've done right since." A few days later, Arthur began framing an addition, 2 walls extending from the cabin's east side. Jun appeared beside him, holding a hammer. "What's this for?" "Reckon you boys need a proper room," Arthur said, driving a nail home. Jun studied him with his old, serious eyes. "Why are you doing this?" Because you're here, Arthur answered simply, and you need it. The boy picked up a board without another word. By sunset, the new frame stood skeletal against the sky. I watched from the window, one hand pressed to the glass. Arthur didn't look back, but for the first time in 3 years, he felt the weight on his chest lift, just enough to breathe. The addition rose slowly, one log at a time, each nail driven true. January snows gave way to the deep freeze of February. Jun learned to notch logs, and Bo fetched tools, singing songs his mother taught him, and handed nails up to Arthur like precious offerings. In the evenings, Mai taught Arthur to read, using an old Bible her husband had carried from China. Her patience was as steady as the sunrise. "The Lord is my shepherd," Arthur read haltingly one evening, his large finger tracing the words. "I shall not want." "Good," Mai said softly. Again the boys were asleep behind the canvas divider, and the fire burned low. Her shoulder brushed against his, a small point of warmth in the vast, cold night. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, something warmer than fire had begun to grow. But the town hadn't forgotten them. They arrived on a bright, cold Saturday for men on horseback led by Mr. Thorne, who smiled a smile as cold as the snow. "Hayes," Thorne began, not bothering to dismount. "We're here as concerned friends. This situation," he gestured toward Mai, who stood on the porch with Jun, "reflects poorly on our community." "She's a widow with 3 children, Arthur said flatly. "Where do you propose they go?" "The county has resources," Thorne said smoothly. "Orphanages?" "No," Mai stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. "You will not take my boys." Thorne's smile widened. "Mrs. Brennan, no one wants to take your sons. But without property, without means, the county has authority. She's under my protection." The words came out harder than Arthur intended. Thorne leaned forward in his saddle. "Let's be plain, Hayes. Your land has valuable water rights. Her late husband had a mining claim some say is still valuable. Some might question your motives, exploiting this poor, foreign woman for your own gain. The lie was crafted to make him look like either a predator or a fool. I'd think on that carefully," Thorne continued. "Accidents happen out here. Fires, fences cut." He turned his horse and rode away, his men following like shadows. Arthur stood in the yard, fists clenched, the fear of losing everything again locking his throat. That night, the blizzard came down like God's own fist. For 3 days they were trapped, the world outside a screaming vortex of white. The close quarters and shared danger broke something open between them. It started with Mai, sitting by the fire, her hands finally still, her eyes staring into the flames. "Talk to me," Arthur said gently. She told him about her husband, a good, careful man killed in a mine collapse she had foreseen in a dream. "I begged him not to go," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I couldn't save him." Arthur found himself speaking of Martha and Daniel, of the fever that came too fast and the storm that had prevented him from fetching the doctor. "I rode all night," he said, the words sticking in his throat like splinters. "By the time I got back he couldn't finish." Mai's hand found his in the firelight. "You can't fight a storm, Arthur." "I should have tried harder." "You would have died, too. Then there would be 3 graves out there." He looked at her then, truly seeing the strength beneath the grief. She had lost everything, just as he had, but she had never stopped fighting. Her composure finally shattered, and she wept, silent, shaking sobs for everything she had lost. Arthur held her, clumsy but sincere, the way a man holds something precious he is afraid of breaking. When she pulled back, the kiss was tentative, a question asked in the dark. It was grief recognizing grief, loneliness finding solace. The fire crackled, the boys slept on, and inside the small cabin, 2 people remembered how to be warm. The morning after the storm broke, sunlight poured through the windows, blinding and clean. But the peace was short-lived. Mai found the papers tucked in a little bag Thorne's deputy must have left, an official eviction notice, stamped by the county. "They'll take my boys," she said, her voice hollow. "If I can't prove I have means, a home. they'll send them to an orphanage. Split them up. When? Arthur's blood ran cold. End of February. Sooner, if Thorne pushes. Not while I'm breathing, he said. He pulled something from a small wooden box on the mantel, his wife's wedding ring, a simple gold band. He pressed it into Mai's palm. Wear it. Let them think what they need to think. You and those boys, you're mine now. To protect, she stared at the ring, then slowly slid it onto her finger. Spring was coming, but the fight was far from over. She shouldn't have gone to town, but they needed supplies, and Arthur had said it was time to face them down. He was wrong. The town hall meeting was packed. Mr. Thorne presided from a raised platform, smiling like a snake. It has come to our attention, Thorne announced to the crowd, that Mr. Hayes may be exploiting Mrs. Brennan's unfortunate circumstances to claim her late husband's mining shares. All eyes turned to Arthur. He stood silent, his jaw tight, the ghosts of his past failures rising up to choke him. Mr. Hayes, the Reverend prompted. Do you have anything to say? Mai willed him to speak, to fight for them. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He said nothing. Thorne's smile widened. I see. Then I move that the county take custodial interest in Mrs. Brennan's children, pending investigation. He didn't manipulate me. Mai stood, her voice ringing through the silent hall. I am not a fool. I understand, she cut him off coldly, that you want me gone so you can steal what's left of my husband's claim. And you want his land for the water rights. She walked out, the slam of the door echoing behind her. She didn't wait for Arthur. Back at the cabin, she removed the ring and placed it on the table. By lantern light, she woke the boys. Ma. Bo rubbed his eyes. What's happening? We're leaving. Jun appeared in the doorway, his face like stone. Where is Mr. Hayes? I don't know. He let them talk about you like that, Jun's voice broke. He just stood there. I know, my love, she whispered, pulling him close. I hate him. She didn't argue. As the sun rose, Arthur appeared in the cabin doorway, his face hollow. He didn't call out, didn't chase them. He just watched as the wagon rolled away, leaving behind the half-finished room, a skeleton of a promise he had failed to keep. Arthur sat by the grave, a half-empty whiskey bottle beside him. I failed you, Martha, he whispered to the wind. I'm a coward. Hoofbeats interrupted his haze. It was Isaac, the town blacksmith, the only man in Stone Creek who had never judged him. Isaac was a former slave, a man who understood the difference between cowardice and courage. You done feeling sorry for yourself? Isaac asked, his voice like gravel. Not yet. Well, hurry it up. Isaac pulled a folded paper from his coat. It was a land deed. His own property, 40 acres free and clear. Give this to her. Make her a landowner. Then you stand up in front of that whole damn town and dare them to do something about it. I can't, Arthur whispered. You think your Martha would want you hiding? Isaac's voice was sharp. She's gone, Arthur. Daniel's gone. But Mai is alive. Them boys are alive. You can save them. What if I fail again? Then you fail fighting. It's better than dying on your knees. Arthur looked at the deed, then at the grave. He stood, his decision made. He rode to the county office in the dark and filed the transfer, his signature slow and careful, the way Mai had taught him. You sure about this, Hayes? The clerk asked. Never been more sure of anything in my life. Arthur Hayes hadn't set foot in the church since the funeral. He walked in now, his spurs jingling in the Sunday morning silence. He walked right down the center aisle and turned to face the congregation. You want to judge Mai Brennan? His voice rang out, clear and strong. Then judge me. I asked her to stay. I started building her a home. If that's improper, then your God and mine are not acquainted. He held up the papers. This is a land deed. 40 acres, transferred legally to Mai Brennan. She is a property owner. Her boys have a home. He met Thorne's furious gaze. You know about property, Thorne. But people aren't property. It's an outrage that you, and all of you, he swept his gaze across the silent pews, turned a mother and 3 children out into a Christmas blizzard and called it righteousness. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I'll stand with her until the ground takes me. Any man here have an issue with that? No one moved. Then, from the back, Isaac stood. I stand with him. The schoolteacher rose. Then a rancher and his wife. Not everyone, but enough. Thorne shoved past Arthur and stormed out of the church in disgrace. Arthur didn't wait for the benediction. He rode north. He found them in a miserable line shack, cold and defeated, and saw him first and ran, launching himself into Arthur's arms. Bo followed, wrapping his arms around Arthur's waist. Jun hesitated, his face a mask of hurt, before he too stepped forward and leaned into the embrace. Arthur held all 3 boys, his eyes closed. Then he looked at Mai. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I was afraid, and I let fear make me a coward. He handed her the deed. It's yours. You and the boys have a home. Whether you want me in it or not. He took a deep breath. I stood up in town. I told them you were mine to protect. Told them I'd stand with you till the end. Mai looked at the deed, at her sons clinging to this man, at his heart plain in his eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring she'd left on his table. Slowly, she slid it onto her own finger. Then make it real, Arthur Hayes, she said softly. Make us a family. His face broke into a smile that was half a sob. He kissed her, a promise made in the cold morning light. Spring bloomed fierce and green across the valley. The cabin stood complete, the addition finished, a porch where Mai shelled peas while the boys played. Isaac officiated the wedding by the creek, a simple ceremony with wildflowers in Mai's hair. One evening, as the sun set, they stood together in the doorway of their home. For broken souls patched together into a family. Are you ready? Mai asked, squeezing his hand. Arthur looked at her, at Jun, Bo, Annan. He looked at the valley stretching out before them, full of promise. The weight of 3 years of grief, of fear, and of failure, finally lifted. I'm home, he said. Mai smiled, her eyes shining. So are we. The door closed softly behind them. Home wasn't a place you found, Arthur thought. It was a place you built, one hard day, one brave choice at a time. And sometimes, if you were lucky, you built it with people who needed building, too.